These are your notes on cell types and cell movement. So there are two cell types. You have prokaryotic cells and you have eukaryotic cells. Karyote, or karyotic in this case, is referring to the nucleus. It technically means kernel, like the center of a piece of corn or like the middle of something, but for a cell that's going to be the nucleus basically. Pro means before, so prokaryotic cells evolved before the nucleus, so they actually don't have one. And eukaryotic cells, the prefix eu means true, which means that they really do have a kernel. They have a nucleus. So prokaryotes lack a nucleus, and eukaryotes have a nucleus. And that's the main key difference here. Right? Prokaryotes don't have it. Eukaryotes do have a nucleus. Prokaryotes still have DNA. It's just not stuck inside of a nucleus. The second main difference is that not just the nucleus, but prokaryotes are going to completely lack all membrane-bound organelles entirely. That's going to include everything like the Golgi, the rough and the smooth ER, any mitochondria or chloroplasts, anything that has a membrane. So I'm just going to go ahead and write basically anything except ribosomes, which do not have their own do not have their own membranes. So any other of those organelles are not going to be in prokaryotes. And just prokaryotes are all around smaller, significantly smaller, like 10 times to 100 times as small as a eukaryotic cell. All right, so prokaryotic cells are basically your bacteria. Both bacterial kingdoms are prokaryotes, and really nothing else is prokaryotic on this planet. It's just the bacteria. So they are very small, they are very simple. Again, they have no nucleus, which means that their DNA isn't in a structure, it's just kind of floating around. This is called the nucleoid. It's kind of a loose confederation of DNA, and it just kind of hangs out in like a region of the cytoplasm, but it is not in a nucleus. No other organelles with membranes exist, so there's nothing in here that has a membrane. There's no lysosomes, no mitochondria, no chloroplasts, no Golgi, no rough or smooth ER. None of that is in a prokaryotic cell. These evolved way, way, way too early for those structures to be in here, and the lineage has all continued without those structures. They do, however, have ribosomes, and that will speak to the importance of ribosomes and what they do, and I'm going to ask you to reflect on that rather than me telling you. The only membrane in the bacterial cell or the prokaryotic cell is the cell membrane itself, right? These also have cell walls. So cell walls are not unique to plants, nor are they unique to fungi, which also have them, but so do bacteria. So do bacteria. Again, these are the most primitive cells on Earth. They were the very first to evolve. The oldest life forms that we have evidence of on this planet are fossil bacterial colonies that are about 3.8 billion years old. So life has been evolving on this planet at minimum for 3.8 billion years once we had these first very, very simple cells. Again, examples of bacteria, E. coli, strep, this is the same kind of bacteria that causes strep throat. E. coli is in eggs, and there are a variety of other bacteria that we'll talk about as well. All the same information, just different little picture. We'll talk about flagella here in a minute. Eukaryotic cells are evolutionarily more complex and they are bigger, right? So they're larger and they're more complex. They have a nucleus, which means their DNA is trapped inside. And that's a key difference. The DNA in a eukaryotic cell does not really come out of it unless it's dividing, and we'll talk about mitosis later on. There are many, many membranes. The cell has its own membrane, also called the plasma membrane. This is the same thing. Plasma means cell in this case, so cell membrane, plasma membrane are synonyms. But all of these organelles, the ER, the mitochondria, the nucleus, the Golgi, centrioles are a little bit different. Lysosomes aren't in here, but if they were in here, they would all of these have additional membranes, right? And again, evolutionarily, they are more complicated and they have evolved from prokaryotic cells. Structures like, where is it? The chloroplast and structures like the mitochondria can actually only be explained by a larger cell engulfing a smaller prokaryote and failing to digest it. We'll talk about what that means later, but this is further evidence of the evolution of eukaryotes. Also, just keep in mind that mitochondria are in plant cells. They're not only in animal cells, right? Mitochondria make energy for the cell, and all eukaryotic cells are going to need it. If you're wondering, okay, well fine, how do bacteria get their energy then? We can talk about that during class, even though bacteria don't have mitochondria. All of your eukaryotic cells are everything except bacteria. So literally any other kind of cell you could possibly ever think of or have encountered that isn't a bacteria must be a eukaryotic cell. So that includes all plant cells, all animal cells, all fungal cells, and also all protist or protista cells, and we'll talk about those guys today. Quick tour of the animal cell. Again, they are eukaryotic, so they have all the eukaryotic characteristics. Some things that are unique to animal cells, their vacuoles are numerous and small. They are numerous and small. They can potentially have hundreds of vacuoles all over the place. They lack a cell wall. They don't have that. They lack chloroplasts. And because they are eukaryotic, they have evolved from prokaryotic cells. And they don't exist as single organisms. All animal cells are part of a larger body, which is to say that animals are multicellular. There are no single-celled animals. Plants are similar. I'm actually going to start at the bottom because of that similarity. Similarly, there are no single-celled plants. Any plant must have at least 2 cells making up its body. And we'll talk about what it looks like when it's only 1 cell. But that wouldn't be a plant. So all plants are multicellular. They also have evolved from prokaryotic cells. They also have all the characteristics of a eukaryotic cell, the nucleus and all the membrane-bound organelles. But some of the key differences between them and animal cells are that they have a cell wall. By the way, that cell wall is made up of cellulose, which if you remember from last unit is a structural carb that is made by synthesizing glucose together in like this lattice work kind of layered format, and you do that by dehydration synthesis, right? They have chloroplasts, unlike animal cells, and they have usually just one large central vacuole right in the middle of the cell that's filled with water. And that's going to help actually keep pressure inside the cell. This is why plants wilt if you don't water them, because if they lack internal water pressure, they kind of lose their form a little bit, and that causes the cells to wilt and it causes the plants to wilt. So if you're like, why do my plants wilt when they lack water? It's because their vacuoles are empty, or there's not enough water in their vacuoles. All right. Protists are probably the one group of organisms so far you're not really familiar with. They are also eukaryotic, right? So they have the nucleus, They have all the other membrane-bound organelles as well. They have also evolved from prokaryotic cells, but the difference is that these are unicellular. These are unicellular. They are only one cell. So evolutionarily, they are in between plants, animals, and the bacteria. So think of it as like a more complicated bacterial cell or a simpler animal or a simpler plant cell, but they are definitely closer in evolutionary origin to your plant and animal cells. Remember, they are eukaryotic rather than prokaryotic. They're just single-celled. This is actually also a great chance to talk about how some of these cells move. Oh, by the way, really quick, before I forget, we will talk about this next week, but if you are a one-celled organism, it's the only cell in the entire organism, which means it kind of has to do everything. So when we talk about cell specialization, I want you to remember that there's a difference when you're the only cell there, right? If you're like a muscle cell, you can rely on other cells in the body to do other functions. But if you're the only cell in the organism, you have to do everything. You can't just be a one-trick pony here. But we'll return to that idea later. All right, so let's see how some cells move. Let's go through flagella, cilia, and pseudopods. So Euglena is an example of a plant-like protist. A plant-like protist. If you're like, well, what's a single-celled plant look like? It probably would look like this thing. This is a protist, it's Euglena, and it moves using a flagellum. So this long whip-like tail here, it will spin it around like a helicopter blade or flick it around like someone flicks their hair back and forth or something. It basically is just a propeller that can move this single-celled organism. Other characteristics of it, again, they're eukaryotes, so they have the nucleus, they have, in this case, they're plant-like, so they actually have chloroplasts. They have a cell membrane. They have what's called a contractile vacuole, which helps them regulate water. I'll go ahead and write that one because that is important. Regulate water. They can actually pump water in or out of their body. They have a stigma, which is a primitive eye spot. Remember, if you're photosynthetic, you need to be able to detect light, and you need to be able to move toward it. So there has to be a way for these organisms to detect light, and the stigma is a photosensitive, a light-sensitive patch of cells. So evolutionarily, this is a simple eye. This is actually a very simple eye. It's one of the first eyes to have evolved, and it's simply a patch of cells sensitive to light. Clearly less complicated than some other eyes out there. Other protists, Paramecium is an animal-like protist. These guys move using cilia, animal-like protist. So these little hair-like projections that are all around the cell basically kind of move back and forth like little teeny fingers and can move the flow of water immediately adjacent to that cell. So that's how actually they are able to move in their environment. And because they are animal-like, they don't actually do photosynthesis. They're not green if you looked at these under a microscope, whereas the Euglena is green because it's photosynthetic. These actually have to consume a material for energy, so they actually have a little primitive mouth. This is like a little evolutionary simple mouth. It's not like the ones that you and I have that we would think of as being complicated. It's much simpler, but it is kind of a very simple mouth, just like there's a simple eye spot over here for Euglena. They have, again, all the other organelles in here. They also have contractile vacuoles because they do live in fresh water, just like Euglena. They have to be able to regulate how much water comes in and out of their body. But again, yeah, these guys are eukaryotic. They have all of the eukaryotic structures in here. Last one we'll talk about is the amoeba. The amoeba also is animal-like, and it moves using what are called pseudopods. Pod means foot, pseudo means fake. So these are fake feet. They're not actual feet, they're just cytoplasmic projections. Basically, cytoskeleton, I'm kind of like drawing it down here in red, is constructed and built really quickly, and it pushes the cytoplasm out in one direction. And then when the cell wants to move somewhere else, it deconstructs all of this cytoskeleton and then can kind of shrink up and project it in another direction. But again, these are animal-like, so they're not going to be green. If you look at them under a microscope, they're actually almost translucent. You have to be pretty careful not to miss them. But because they're eukaryotic, they're going to have a nucleus. They're going to have all these other organelles. They're not really shown in the picture, but they're there. Lots of food vacuoles. Remember, this is just a picture. They also live in fresh water, so they have a contractile vacuole, which helps them regulate that water. Yeah, those are amoebas, and they move using pseudopods. Our last group of cells, eukaryotic cells, are the fungal cells, fungi. Again, all the eukaryotic structures are here. One key difference is that their cell wall is made not of cellulose, but of chitin. That CH is a hard K sound. It's not chitin or chitin, it's chitin. And just like cellulose, it is a structural carbohydrate. These cannot do photosynthesis, so there are no chloroplasts. And just like other eukaryotic cells, they have also evolved from prokaryotes. And I hope these notes helped.